this foul corruption hath spread amongst us.
A power's response for this wickedness. Who torments you, child? Speak the truth before God.
It is Sarah Good! She is a witch and seeks to murder us!
Lord, have mercy upon us.
I am innocent, sir! I deny these charges!
She sends her spectre to torture me. Look, it tears at me now.
Woman, confess your compact with the devil!
O Lord, receive my spirit. I am innocent. God, forgive us. What have we done?
Stop everything, because what I'm about to show you is the most terrifying collapse of civilization in American history. And here's the shocking part. It was completely predictable. Remember Boston in the 1680s? That perfect Puritan paradise where every thought was monitored, every behavior judged, every soul examined for signs of sin, where children were raised under such religious pressure that natural childhood became impossible. Well, those children just became teenagers, and they're about to destroy everything. Picture this. It's 1692, Salem Village, Massachusetts. The most successful religious society in human history is about to commit the most systematic murder in American colonial history. Not because they became less religious, but because they became more religious. So religious that they convinced themselves their neighbors could fly, transform into animals, and make pacts with the devil. But here's what's going to blow your mind. This isn't sudden madness. This is the inevitable result of the psychological pressure we saw building in Boston. The same religious control that created Puritan success created Puritan destruction. And the children who trigger this apocalypse. They're the generation we watched growing up under impossible religious standards, learning to spy on their families, trained to fear their own thoughts. Now they're 17 years old, psychologically damaged, and they've just discovered something terrifying. Accusing someone of witchcraft gives them more power than any adult in their community has ever had. But here's what makes this story truly horrifying. These aren't ignorant peasants. These are Harvard graduates, successful merchants, accomplished ministers, the most educated people in America. And they're about to convince themselves that their neighbors can fly through the air and dance with the devil in the forest. This is the story of how religious paradise became religious hell, how the most successful society in colonial America destroyed itself in 8 months of terror, how psychological pressure finally exploded into community madness, and why that explosion created the foundation for American religious freedom. Because Salem doesn't just end the Puritan experiment, it proves why religious tolerance is the only system that works. The perfect society ready to explode. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began. Salem Village, 1691. If you didn't know what was coming, you'd think you were looking at the most successful community in human history. Picture the scene. Prosperous farms surrounding a thriving village center. The Puritan work ethic has created unprecedented agricultural productivity, education levels that exceed anything in Europe, crime rates so low that theft is virtually unknown. But underneath this perfect surface, the psychological pressure we saw building in Boston has been intensifying for 20 years. Here's what nobody talks about. Salem Village in 1691 is a community where nobody trusts anybody, where neighbors spy on neighbors, looking for signs of insufficient religious devotion, where parents interrogate children about their thoughts and dreams. The same surveillance system that maintained religious perfection has created a society where everyone lives in constant fear of being exposed as spiritually inadequate. And there's something else brewing in Salem that makes the explosion inevitable: economic tension disguised as religious conflict. Salem Village is splitting into two factions: the prosperous farmers near Salem town, who are benefiting from trade with the outside world, and the struggling farmers in the outer areas, who feel left behind by economic changes. But in a Puritan society, you can't admit economic jealousy. That would be the sin of envy. So economic conflict gets expressed as religious suspicion. The successful farmers must be spiritually corrupt. How else could they prosper while good Christians struggle? The struggling farmers must be lazy or sinful. How else could they fail in God's chosen community? By winter 1691, Salem village is a powder keg of religious pressure, economic tension, and psychological damage, waiting for someone to light the fuse. And that someone is about to be a 9-year-old girl named Elizabeth Parris. The children's psychological breakdown. January 1692, in the house of Salem village minister Samuel Parris, something is happening to the children that will soon terrify the entire community. Elizabeth Parris, age 9, and Abigail Williams, age 11, start having fits that nobody can explain. Screaming, convulsions, speaking in strange languages, contorting their bodies into impossible positions. Picture what this looks like to Puritan adults. 2 children from the minister's household, raised in the most religiously correct environment possible, suddenly exhibiting behavior that seems supernatural. The local doctor, William Griggs, examines the girls and finds no physical cause for their condition. In 1692, when medical knowledge can't explain something, there's only one remaining possibility: supernatural influence. But here's what modern psychology would recognize immediately. These children are having psychological breakdowns from the pressure of living in a society where natural childhood behavior is treated as sinful. Think about what Elizabeth and Abigail have experienced their entire lives: constant surveillance of their thoughts and actions, punishment for any behavior that doesn't meet adult religious standards, training to fear their own natural impulses as signs of spiritual corruption. They've never been allowed to be children, never permitted to express normal emotions, explore natural curiosity, or make childhood mistakes without spiritual interrogation. And now they're having fits that get them more adult attention than they've ever received. Adults who usually punish them for any deviation from perfect behavior are now treating them as victims of forces beyond their control. The psychological relief is so overwhelming that other children start having similar fits. Anne Putnam Jr., age 12, daughter of one of Salem's most prominent families, begins exhibiting the same symptoms. Mary Walcott, age 17, starts having convulsions and visions. Within weeks, nearly a dozen girls between ages 9 and 20 are having fits that the community interprets as supernatural affliction. But here's the crucial detail. These aren't random children. These are the daughters of Salem's most religiously prominent families, children who have experienced the most intense religious pressure, the most complete surveillance, the most systematic suppression of natural childhood behavior. They're the generation we saw being damaged by Puritan child-rearing in Boston, now breaking down under psychological pressures their parents created but don't understand. The first accusation, February 1692. The adult community is desperate to understand what's happening to their children, and they make the most fatal decision in American colonial history. Instead of questioning whether their religious system might be harming children, they ask the children to identify who is causing their supernatural affliction. Picture the scene. Prominent Puritan ministers and magistrates gathering around 9-year-old Elizabeth Parris, asking her to name the witch who is tormenting her. Elizabeth, who has never had adult attention like this in her life, who has lived in constant fear of adult disapproval, suddenly has the power to make adults hang on her every word. The first name she gives them, Tituba, the Parris family's Caribbean slave. This choice isn't accidental. Tituba is the perfect scapegoat. A woman with no social protection, no community standing, no ability to defend herself against accusations. Someone the community can blame without threatening their own social structure. But the children don't stop with Tituba. They name Sarah Good, a homeless beggar who disturbs the community by asking for charity, and Sarah Osborne, an elderly woman who has violated Puritan social norms by remarrying and skipping church services. Notice the pattern. The first accused are women with no social power, no community protection, no ability to fight back. But here's what makes this truly terrifying. The children's accusations work. The adult community believes them completely. Why? Because Puritan theology has prepared them to believe exactly this. They've been taught that Satan is constantly trying to infiltrate their godly community through human agents. They've been conditioned to see invisible spiritual warfare everywhere. When their own children show signs of supernatural affliction, it confirms everything they've been taught about spiritual danger. And the children, discovering that their accusations are believed and acted upon, realize they now have more power than any adults in their community. They can point at any person and destroy their life with a single sentence. The hysteria spreads. March 1692. What starts as accusations against social outcasts rapidly spirals into community-wide terror as the circle of accusations expands beyond safe targets. Here's what nobody expected. The children's accusations start reaching respectable community members. Martha Corey, a full church member with an excellent reputation. Rebecca Nurse, a 71-year-old woman known for her piety and kindness. Even Elizabeth Proctor, wife of a prosperous farmer. Picture the community's shock. These aren't social outcasts or suspicious characters. These are the pillars of Salem society, women whose religious devotion nobody has ever questioned. But the Puritan logic is inescapable. If witches can appear as perfectly godly people, then anyone could be a witch. The more unlikely the accusation seems, the more it proves Satan's deceptive power. And the children, intoxicated by their newfound power, keep escalating their accusations. Each new name brings more adult attention, more community drama, more control over the adult world that has controlled them their entire lives. But something else is happening that makes the hysteria unstoppable. Adults start joining the children's accusations. Ann Putnam Sr., mother of one of the afflicted girls, begins having her own visions of witches. Mercy Lewis, a servant in the Putnam household, starts experiencing supernatural attacks. The psychological contagion spreads through the community as adults compete to prove their spiritual sensitivity by experiencing supernatural persecution. By April 1692, the Salem village jail is overflowing with accused witches awaiting trial. The Massachusetts colonial government establishes a special court of oyer and terminer to handle the crisis. But here's what makes this truly terrifying. The legal system accepts evidence that would be laughable in any normal circumstances. Spectral evidence. Claims that the accused person's spirit appeared to the witness and committed supernatural acts becomes the primary proof of witchcraft. Dreams, visions, and hallucinations are treated as legal testimony. When accused witches deny their guilt, their denials are treated as proof of deception. When they confess, their confessions are treated as proof of guilt. The Puritan system has created a legal framework where innocence becomes impossible to prove. The trials and executions. June 10, 1692. Bridget Bishop becomes the first person executed in the Salem witch trials. She will not be the last. Picture the scene at Gallows Hill. The most educated, most godly community in America watching one of their neighbors die because children claimed her spirit visited them in supernatural form. But here's what makes this execution truly horrifying. Everyone involved believes they're doing God's work. The judges believe they're protecting the community from demonic influence. The ministers believe they're defending Christian civilization. The community believes they're purging evil from their midst. The same religious devotion that created Puritan success is now creating systematic murder. And the children, watching their accusations result in actual death, realize their power has become absolute. They can literally kill anyone in their community with their testimony. The executions continue throughout the summer. Sarah Good, who curses the judges as she dies, telling them they will face God's judgment for murdering innocent people. Rebecca Nurse, whose execution shocks even her accusers because of her known piety. By September, 19 people have been hanged, one man pressed to death with stones for refusing to enter a plea, and 4 people have died in jail awaiting trial. But here's what's most terrifying about the Salem trials. The victims aren't random. They follow specific patterns that reveal the psychological forces driving the accusations. Many of the accused are women who have violated Puritan gender expectations, speaking out against community leaders, inheriting property independently, or challenging male authority. Others are people involved in property disputes with the families of the accusers, suggesting that personal conflicts are being expressed through supernatural accusations. Some are simply people who have questioned the validity of the accusations themselves, proving that skepticism of the witch trials becomes evidence of witchcraft. The Puritan community is systematically destroying anyone who threatens its psychological unity or challenges its authority structure. The moment of realization, October 1692. Something happens that will finally break the witch trial hysteria. The accusations reach someone untouchable. The afflicted children accuse Lady Mary Phipps, wife of Massachusetts Governor William Phipps, of witchcraft. Picture the moment of realization. If the governor's wife can be accused of making pacts with Satan, then absolutely no one is safe from the children's accusations. Governor Phipps, who has been supporting the witch trials as necessary religious purification, suddenly realizes that the system has become completely uncontrollable. But there's another realization spreading through the Salem community. The trials aren't creating peace and godliness. They're creating terror and division. Families are torn apart by accusations. Churches are split between those who support the trials and those who question them. Economic life is disrupted as accused witches lose their property and their ability to work. The society that was supposed to become more godly through witch trial purification is instead becoming less functional, less prosperous, less unified, and some of the most thoughtful Puritan leaders are beginning to question whether they might be making a terrible mistake. Increase Mather, one of New England's most respected ministers and president of Harvard College, publishes Cases of Conscience Concerning Evil Spirits, arguing that spectral evidence is unreliable and that it's better to let 10 witches go free than to execute one innocent person. The same intellectual sophistication that created Puritan success is finally being applied to examining Puritan hysteria. In October 1692, Governor Phipps dissolves the Court of Oyer and Terminer and forbids any further arrests for witchcraft. The Salem witch trials end not because the community stops believing in witchcraft, but because they realize the trials themselves have become more dangerous than the witches they're supposed to eliminate. The psychological aftermath. Spring 1693. The witch trial hysteria is over, but Salem Village faces something almost as terrifying: the realization of what they've done. Picture the psychological aftermath. 19 innocent people are dead. Hundreds of others have had their lives destroyed by accusations. Families are permanently divided by suspicions that may never heal. The children who started the accusations are now facing a community that no longer believes their stories. The power that intoxicated them for 8 months has completely evaporated. But the most devastating realization is theological. If the witch trials were wrong, then the entire Puritan system of spiritual discernment is unreliable. Think about what this means. Puritans have built their society on the belief that they can identify spiritual truth, distinguish between godly and ungodly behavior, and create communities that please God. The witch trials prove that their spiritual discernment is catastrophically flawed, that their religious authorities can be wrong, that their community judgments can be deadly. In January 1697, the Massachusetts General Court declares a day of fasting and repentance for the witch trial errors. Samuel Sewall, one of the judges, publicly confesses his guilt and asks for forgiveness. But some of the trial participants never admit error. Samuel Parris, the minister whose household started the accusations, maintains that real witchcraft occurred even if some innocent people were executed. The community response reveals a fundamental split in Puritan thinking. Some people learn from the tragedy and begin questioning religious authority. Others double down on religious certainty to avoid confronting their complicity in murder. This psychological division will shape American religious development for generations. Those who learned from Salem become advocates for religious tolerance, skeptical authority, and individual conscience. Those who don't learn from Salem become more authoritarian, more certain, more dangerous. The cultural transformation. By 1700, Salem's witch trial catastrophe has triggered a religious revolution throughout New England. not by destroying religious faith, but by transforming how Americans think about religious authority. Here's what the witch trials taught Americans. Religious certainty can be more dangerous than religious doubt. Community consensus can be more destructive than individual dissent. Spiritual authority can be more fallible than human reason. These lessons create the intellectual foundation for American religious freedom. Picture the change in religious thinking. Before Salem, Puritans believed that religious authority should control individual conscience. After Salem, many Americans believe that individual conscience should control religious authority. Before Salem, unified religious community was seen as strength. After Salem, religious diversity is increasingly seen as protection against religious tyranny. Before Salem, questioning religious leaders was considered dangerous rebellion. After Salem, failing to question religious leaders is considered dangerous submission. The psychological trauma of Salem transforms American religious culture from authority-based to evidence-based, from community-controlled to individually guided, from certainty-seeking to tolerance-building. But Salem's cultural impact extends beyond religion, into politics and law. The witch trials prove that even educated, well-intentioned people can commit systematic injustice when they believe they have absolute truth on their side. This realization influences American constitutional thinking. If religious communities can't be trusted with absolute power, then political authorities also need checks and balances. If Salem's ministers and magistrates could execute innocent people while believing they were doing God's work, then no human authority should have unchecked power over life and death. The Bill of Rights protections against religious establishment and unreasonable search and seizure reflect lessons learned from Salem's religious tyranny. The children's later lives. What happened to the children who started the Salem witch trials? Their later lives reveal the lasting psychological damage of the hysteria they helped create. Ann Putnam Jr., who was 12 when she accused dozens of people of witchcraft, grows up to become a deeply troubled adult. In 1706, at age 26, she publishes a public apology, confessing that her accusations were wrong and asking forgiveness from the families of those she helped execute. But her confession reveals something even more disturbing. She claims she was deluded by Satan into making false accusations. Even in her apology, she can't acknowledge that her accusations came from psychological pressure rather than supernatural influence. Other former accusers follow different paths. Some, like Mercy Lewis, disappear from historical records, possibly unable to live with their complicity in judicial murder. Others maintain their stories throughout their lives, insisting that they really experienced supernatural attacks, even if their specific accusations were mistaken. The psychological patterns reveal lasting damage from the religious pressure that created the hysteria in the first place. These children never learned healthy skepticism about authority. They were trained to believe that adult religious leaders were always right, that community consensus was always reliable, that their own perceptions were always accurate if they aligned with religious expectations. When the witch trials collapsed, they didn't develop critical thinking skills. They just transferred their absolute certainty from one belief system to another. This psychological pattern, replacing one form of certainty with another, rather than developing comfort with uncertainty and complexity, becomes a recurring theme in American religious extremism. The Salem children teach an eternal lesson. Religious systems that don't allow questioning create people who can't question anything, including their own destructive behavior. The eternal lesson. Standing in Salem today, you can visit the witch house where investigations took place, the old burying point where victims are commemorated, and the sites where innocent people died because a community lost its ability to distinguish between truth and terror. But in 1692, this wasn't historical lesson. It was living proof that religious certainty without religious freedom creates religious catastrophe. Imagine one final moment. Picture yourself walking through Salem village in 1693, 1 year after the trials ended. Neighbors who accused each other of witchcraft now pass each other in uncomfortable silence. Children who destroyed adults' lives with their testimony now face community suspicion and guilt. The families of the executed live with permanent grief and anger. The families of the accusers live with permanent shame and defensiveness. The community that was supposed to become more godly through witch trial purification is instead fractured beyond repair. But from this catastrophe emerges the most important lesson in American religious history. Freedom of conscience isn't just a nice ideal, it's the only practical system that prevents religious communities from destroying themselves. Salem proves that even the most educated, most well-intentioned religious people will commit terrible injustices if they believe their religious truth justifies suppressing other people's religious freedom. The witch trials become America's most powerful argument for the separation of church and state, for religious tolerance, for individual liberty protected against majority tyranny. When the Founding Fathers write the First Amendment, they're remembering Salem. When they prohibit religious tests for public office, they're preventing another religious establishment that could accumulate unchecked power. The children of Salem, in their psychological breakdown and community destruction, teach America that religious freedom protects everyone, including religious people, from the dangers of religious authority. The paradise that became hell shows why tolerating different beliefs creates safer communities than enforcing uniform beliefs. Salem's lesson echoes through American history every time religious or political authorities claim they have truth so certain that opposing views should be silenced, dissenting voices should be suppressed, or individual conscience should be subordinated to community consensus. The afflicted children's false accusations remind us that even sincere people can be sincerely wrong, that even good intentions can create evil outcomes, that even religious devotion can become religiously destructive. That's all for our journey through Salem's transformation from paradise to hell. If there's another moment when religious certainty created religious catastrophe, another place where community pressure destroyed community bonds, another story about how good intentions created terrible outcomes, let me know in the comments. Because the real lesson of Salem isn't that religion is dangerous. It's that any system that doesn't allow questioning its own authority will eventually use that authority to destroy innocent people. The witch trials ended. The need for religious freedom never will.